Hi there, I'm Fahad Mian and this is Prime Philosophy. Today I wanted to talk about my philosophy on photographic composition. Some of you who know me personally know that I spent a number of years getting a diploma in photography, and while I was doing that I worked in the industry for a number of years, did various things from retouching to portraiture to school photography. And then I after that, shunned the industry and didn't really want to work in it, and sort of buried my head in fine art photography. I really wanted to get a grasp of what makes a photographic composition actually work, how it works, and I really ended up delving into it to try and find out more about myself and more about the universe and more about how things in general work, relationships and such, relationships with everything, not just, courtship and stuff, but that too. And Wikipedia has a pretty good description on composition. It describes it as the arrangement of various visual elements around a subject to create something to look at. And some of those elements can be things like geometry or shape or lines or patterns, depth, tone, volume, space. All, for the most part, a lot of artists, especially for thousands of years, have been talking about the rule of thirds and the golden mean spiral as well, which are two geometric principles which are based on the Fibonacci sequence. Basically, it says that you create a point of interest at the third marking, so you've got a third over here across the frame from over here, or a third from there, and a third from the top here, for example, which is sort of why I've spaced myself in this particular area of the frame. My eyes, anyway. And a lot of people will look at those as hard, fast rules that you're meant to follow, and they'll say, well, rules are meant to be broken, or I want to ignore the rules. And if you ever hear someone say that, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. You really need to watch them rather than listen to them, I think, and just sort of learn whether they do actually know whether they're doing something or not. But my description today, what I really want to talk about is not so much not so much how to create a good composition, but how a good composition actually works, the function as opposed to the method. And a lot of these elements of photography will traditionally bear on associations that we as humans have with emotional things. For example, you take a photo of a baby crying, and almost everyone's going to have an emotional reaction to that. That's human. It's what we gain and gather as we grow up. So that's understandable. It's obvious. There are certain things like colors. Cooler colors tend to denote sadness or calm, and warmer colors tend to denote anger or things just not quite being calm, the opposite of calm, volatility perhaps. Although what I wanted to do was strip all of that obvious emotional context away and just look at what really made it work and how it functions with our brain. And when I boiled it down, I basically got to repetition and structure. And when you look at repetition can encompass geometry and shape and line and direction. It can use all those elements, but having a repeating pattern in there kind of sets off a tone. It's like The first few beats of a song, you hear it and your brain kind of knows where it needs to continue on. You can sort of guess it, and that's how visual compositions, that's how photographic compositions, I think, also work, where the goal is to provide the viewer with something that they can add to. It shouldn't ever be symmetrical, because symmetrical denotes that something is perfect, and if something is perfect, you can't add anything to it. The person viewing it doesn't contribute to it, they don't feel like they're a part of it, there's nothing they can do which will make it their own, or make them a part of it, or make them interact with it. It just is the way it is. Hence why the rule of thirds kind of breaks away from symmetry. And I don't really think it should be called a rule of thirds, it's more of a guide. A lot of people will tell you that. And it doesn't really have to be exactly on the thirds. I think it could be between the 1/3 mark and the 2/5 mark, for example. Somewhere around there. And when you hear a lot of people say, well, rules are meant to be broken, or I ignore the rules, they're kind of talking bullshit. They don't really know what they're saying, because if you want to break the rules, you have to know how the rules work in order to break them properly, or dissect them and remove the various elements in a very careful way, so that what you're left with is a kind of negative space which denotes or speaks of that rule. So you can't just completely ignore it. You can't just break it and not give a shit, because you still have to imply that the rule was there. Now, the way I gather that all this works is in a relationship that's formed between the photographer and the subject and the viewer. And when you create a form of repetition, and then you add structure to it, and the structure, ideally you want to think about a vortex, you want to think about a swirling motion, or something that leads from here to there. And when you imply that, or once you set off that using the rule of thirds and the golden mean, which is like a golden mean would be like a seashell kind of spiral pattern. Once you kickstart that pattern off, then you're kind of playing like a emotional game of tennis with the viewer. You're serving a ball to them, and it's their turn to react to it, and they have to hit the ball back to you, and back and forth. There's a interplay that happens between the viewer and the piece of art that you've created. And that's where it really lies. The reason why the vortex, or the Fibonacci sequence, or the rule of thirds, or the golden mean spiral, the reason why this actually works is because its end point is infinity, and because the next step, or the next phase in that interaction, is the addition of the previous two interactions. So what's come before dictates what will come after. So everything included within the composition will lead you to something greater. And with the vortex being having an infinite path outwards, there's no real end story to it. There's no end point to it. There's no stopping to it. It's really up to the person's imagination how far they want to take it. Even if they walk away from that photo, they know they can come back to it and they can continue on, or they can start from scratch and have another play at it. And it's really this emotional dance between the viewer and the photograph, and in some ways the photographer as well, because the photographer's kind of instigating it. The photographer is like the mother trying to set up her son with a woman or a man or whatever, another person, for them to be a happy couple together and have a relationship, and then just sits on the sidelines and watches or annoys them or whatever. But odd metaphor there, I know. And that's really how I think it works. I think that this vortex structure that you're setting a path for these elements to travel along, it interacts with the brain. I'm going to say it interacts with the pineal gland because we're talking about repetition, which is frequency, and we're talking about a structure, which is the vortex structure is inherent in nature. It's in plants, it's in our DNA, it's in the universe, it's in the solar system, it's in energy fields, gravitational fields. It's a natural thing. And for some reason, our brain just sort of clicks with it. And that's an important. There are two important things to consider. So you set off a series of cues, and then you imply that it's going off in a particular path, and then you leave it to the viewer. That's the core of it. And then you can add, or you can add colors to that. You can add context and smiles and brides and crying babies and poor people or war zones and all that to it. But once you get that nailed down, those two simple concepts, everything sort of clicks into place. And for me, it ended up just sort of explaining a whole lot of stuff about the world and about the universe, just looking at those particular points. If you have any comments, please comment. If you like, please like and share, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks. Bye.